"Excuse me, sir, but I think you're in the wrong place." The voice was young, slick with the unearned confidence of a fraternity pledge. It cut through the low hum of the Oak Barrel Diner, a place of worn vinyl booths and the comforting smell of coffee and fried onions. Raymond Clark, 84 years old, did not look up immediately. He took a slow, deliberate sip from his thick ceramic mug, the warmth of familiar comfort in his gnarled hands. He sat alone in a booth meant for four, a solitary island of calm. The young man, a college kid with a deliberately messy haircut and a brand-name sweatshirt, cleared his throat, louder this time. "Hello, sir, this is our table." Finally, Raymond raised his head. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, were clear and steady. He wore a deep blue VFW blazer, the fabric softened with age. On the breast pocket, a row of miniature medals glinted softly under the fluorescent lights. A matching blue garrison cap sat perfectly on his silver hair. He looked at the boy, then at the three friends smirking behind him. "Is your name on it?" Raymond asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The boy's smirk tightened. "Funny. No, but we come here every Tuesday. Everyone knows this is our spot. Now, are you going to move, or do we have a problem?" The boy's friend, a lanky kid named Kevin, leaned in. "Yeah, Pops, time to shuffle off. The early bird special ended hours ago." The third, a girl named Jessica with a phone already in her hand, framed Raymond in her screen. "This is classic," she stage whispered to her friends. "Some old-timer thinks he can just park himself anywhere. It's an entitlement thing." Raymond Clark said nothing. He simply placed his mug back on the saucer with a soft clink, his gaze unwavering. He had faced down charging battalions in the frozen hell of North Korea. A few entitled children with cheap insults were less than a passing breeze, but the injustice of it, the casual cruelty, began to coil in the air. The quiet dignity of the old soldier was a mirror, and the students did not like the reflection they saw, so they decided they would have to break it. The confrontation, once initiated, grew like a stain. The ringleader, who had introduced himself to the manager as Chad, felt the eyes of the diner on him and mistook the attention for admiration. He doubled down. "Look, old man," Chad said, planting his hands on the table, leaning into Raymond's personal space. "I don't know if you're confused or just stubborn, but this booth is for paying customers who are, going to order more than a single cup of coffee over 2 hours." Raymond's eyes flickered to the half-full pot the waitress had left on his table. "She said I could have the pot," he stated simply. "I am a paying customer." "That's not the point," Kevin chimed in, his voice cracking with a nervous energy. "The point is, you're taking up valuable real estate. This is a business. We're regulars. We support this establishment." Jessica, still filming, zoomed in on Raymond's face. "Are you a veteran?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock curiosity. "Is that what the little costume is all about?" "My grandpa was in the army. He doesn't walk around in a get-up trying to get free coffee." The word costume hung in the air, ugly and sharp. A few other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A middle-aged couple in the next booth pointedly turned their backs, trying to absorb themselves in their menus. The waitress, a young woman named Brenda, hovered near the kitchen door, wringing her hands, clearly unsure of how to intervene. Chad saw the manager, a young man named Mr. Henderson, who looked barely older than the students themselves, emerge from the back office. "Hey, manager," Chad called out, waving him over. "We've got a situation here." Mr. Henderson scurried over, his tie slightly askew, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He was a man who hated confrontation, and his diner was now the stage for a particularly nasty one. "What seems to be the problem, folks?" he asked, his eyes darting between the imperious students and the stone-faced old man. "The problem," Chad said, gesturing dramatically at Raymond, "is this guy. He's been here for ages. He's making my friends uncomfortable, and he refuses to give up our table. He was staring at me," Jessica added, lowering her phone for a moment to look doe-eyed and victimized. It was creepy. The accusation was a lie, a casual and venomous fabrication designed to get a result, and it worked. Mr. Henderson's professional, if flimsy, resolve crumbled. He turned to Raymond, his expression pleading. "Sir," he began, his voice soft and apologetic, "I'm so sorry, but these fine young people are regular customers. Would you mind, terribly, if I moved you to one of the counter seats?" Raymond looked at the manager, then at the smug faces of the students. He had not survived the chosen reservoir, had not carried his wounded sergeant 2 miles through waist-deep snow to be shuffled around a diner by a boy who hadn't learned to properly knot a tie. "I am quite comfortable here," Raymond said, his voice quiet but firm. "I will be leaving shortly. There is no need for all of this." This quiet refusal was seen as an act of war. "Unbelievable," Chad exclaimed, throwing his hands up. The nerve. Henderson, are you going to do something or not? We'll take our business elsewhere. I'll make sure to mention your veteran harassment policy on Yelp. The threat of a bad online review was the final blow for the beleaguered manager. His face hardened with a desperate, borrowed authority. Sir, he said, his voice now sterner, I am the manager of this establishment. I am asking you to vacate this booth. You can move to the counter, or you can leave. The diner had grown quiet. The clinking of forks and the low murmur of conversation had faded away. Everyone was watching. Raymond felt the weight of their eyes, the sting of a public humiliation he had not earned. He slowly reached into his blazer's inner pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, preparing to pay for his coffee and end the ordeal. As Jessica raised her phone again to capture the moment of his defeat, she zoomed in on the row of medals. Seriously, what are those for? She sneered. Perfect attendance? She pointed a manicured finger at the one in the center, a silver 5-pointed star. What about that one? Did you win it at the state fair for best pig? As her words hit him, the sounds of the diner seemed to warp and fade for Raymond. The glint of the fluorescent light off the silver star on his chest suddenly became the blinding white flash of a mortar shell exploding in the snow. The smell of stale coffee was replaced by the acrid metallic scent of gunpowder and frozen earth. He wasn't in the Oak Barrel Diner anymore. He was on a desolate, windswept ridge in Korea, the screams of men echoing in his ears. He could feel the phantom weight of a young Marine, a boy from Ohio named Miller, slung over his shoulder. The boy was bleeding, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The star wasn't a piece of metal. It was the weight of that boy's life, the memory of a promise made in the heart of a blizzard of steel. The memory lasted only a second, but it stiffened his spine. He would not be shamed. He would not be broken. Not here. Not by these children. Across the diner, tucked away in a corner booth, a man named Frank Kowalski had been watching the entire scene unfold with a slow-burning rage. Frank was a 45-year-old sales executive dressed in a sharp suit, but for 20 years he had worn a different uniform. He had been a master sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and he recognized the look in the old man's eyes. It was a look of profound patience, the kind you only learn when you've endured things most people couldn't even imagine. When Mr. Henderson delivered his final ultimatum, demanding that Raymond leave the premises, Frank knew he had seen enough. This was no longer a simple matter of rude kids and a weak manager. It was a desecration. He discreetly pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, keeping it below the level of the table. He didn't dial 911. He scrolled through his contacts to a name few civilians would have, Sergeant Major Thorne. The phone was answered on the first ring. Thorne. The voice was pure gravel and authority. Sergeant Major, it's Frank Kowalski, Frank said, his own voice low and urgent, the years of military discipline snapping back into place. Kowalski, good to hear from you. What's wrong? Sir, I'm at the Oak Barrel Diner off Route 9, Frank said, his eyes fixed on the scene. Raymond was now slowly, painfully, pushing himself out of the booth. There's a situation here. An elderly gentleman, VFW blazer, garrison cap. He's got a rack of medals you could see from space. There was a pause on the other end. Describe him. 80-something, silver hair, steady as a rock even with these punks screaming in his face. Sir, I think it's him. Frank's voice dropped even lower. I think it's Clark. Raymond Clark. The silence on the line was now heavy, absolute. Then Thorne's voice returned, stripped of all pleasantries, cold and hard as granite. Are you certain, Kowalski? The silver star is center on his rack, sir. It's Gunny Clark, I'm sure of it. And they're throwing him out. A bunch of college kids and the manager. They're making him leave right now. Stay there, Master Sergeant, Thorne commanded. The use of Frank's old rank was not a suggestion. It was an order. Do not engage. Do not let him leave the property if you can help it. I am handling this. We are 5 minutes out. The line went dead. Frank Kowalski slipped his phone back into his pocket. He took a deep breath. The cavalry was coming. The call ended in a Spartan, impeccably organized office at the Marine Corps recruiting station 2 miles away. Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, a man whose physical presence seemed to bend the very air around him, stood up so fast his heavy oak chair shot backward and slammed against the wall. His face, a roadmap of discipline and hard-won experience, was a thundercloud of disbelief and fury. A young corporal sitting at a nearby desk looked up, startled. Everything all right, Sergeant Major? Corporal, get the CO on the line now. Thorne's voice wasn't a shout, it was a low-frequency blast that rattled the pens in their holder. And get a vehicle detail ready. 2 vehicles, 6 men, dress blues. They have 90 seconds to be in the parking lot. Go. The corporal, trained to react, not to question, was already dialing. As the phone rang, Thorne strode to the window, his jaw clenched. The CO's voice, sharp and professional, crackled through the speakerphone. "What is it, Thorne?" "Sir, we have a code broken arrow situation," Thorne said, using an old unofficial term for a legend in distress. "Not a real one, sir, a personal one. It's Gunny Clark, Raymond Clark." The silence from the CO was profound. Every Marine knew the name. They knew the stories. Raymond Ironheart Clark was not just a veteran, he was a monument. "My God," the CO breathed. "Where is he?" "At the Oak Barrel Diner on Route 9, sir. Being harassed by civilians. They're trying to throw him out as we speak. What do you need, Marcus?" "With all due respect, sir," Thorne said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction, "this is not a request. This is a matter of institutional honor. I am taking 6 of our best men to escort a hero. We're rolling now." "Understood, Sergeant Major." The CO's voice was galvanized. "Get our man." Back in the diner, the final act of humiliation was playing out. Raymond had managed to get to his feet, his old bones protesting the movement. The indignity of the situation had settled on his shoulders, making him seem smaller, more fragile. He carefully placed a $5 bill on the table, more than enough to cover his coffee. His movements were slow, deliberate, a last stand of dignity against the jeering crowd of youths. Chad, puffed up with his victory, wasn't content to simply let him leave. He needed a final public show of dominance. He stepped directly into Raymond's path, blocking his exit from the booth. "See," Chad said with a triumphant sneer. "Told you this wasn't the place for you. Maybe try the VA hospital cafeteria next time, Grandpa. They probably have Jell-O." Jessica, her phone back up and recording, giggled. "This is going to be my most viewed story ever," she whispered to Kevin, who was nodding like a bobblehead. #Boomer gets owned. Raymond looked at the boy blocking his way. This child who had never known a day of real hardship, who mistook cruelty for strength. He didn't say a word. He simply prepared to step around him. It was at that exact moment that a low, powerful rumble began to vibrate through the diner's floor. It started as a deep thrumming, a bass note that grew steadily in intensity until the spoons on the tables began to rattle in their saucers. Every head in the diner, including Chad's, turned towards the large front windows. 2 gleaming black SUVs, the kind used by government officials and dignitaries, had pulled up directly in front of the diner, their engines purring with disciplined power. They weren't police cars, but they radiated an authority that was far more intimidating. They blocked the entire street, causing other cars to slow and stop. Then, in perfect chilling unison, the doors of both vehicles opened. 6 men emerged. They were not men. They were apparitions of martial perfection. 6 United States Marines, ramrod straight, dressed in the immaculate splendor of their dress blue uniforms, the deep blue of their jackets, the crisp white of their belts and hats, the blood-red stripe on their trousers. It was a sight of such breathtaking discipline it seemed to silence the world. The sun glinted off the polished brass of their buttons and the mirror-like shine of their shoes. They moved without a word, forming a perfect 2x3 formation on the sidewalk, their faces impassive and hard as stone. Leading them, stepping out of the front passenger seat, was Sergeant Major Thorne. The bell above the diner door jingled, a ridiculously cheerful sound in the suddenly tense atmosphere. Sergeant Major Thorne entered, his 6 Marines following in perfect step, their heels clicking on the linoleum with the precise rhythm of a funeral drum. They formed up just inside the entrance, a living wall of honor and intimidation. The entire diner was frozen. Forks were suspended halfway to mouths. Conversations died in throats. Jessica's phone wavered in her hand. Thorne's eyes, cold and analytical, swept the room. They passed over the terrified face of Mr. Henderson, dismissed the gawking patrons, and slid over the pale, confused faces of Chad and his friends as if they were insignificant pieces of furniture. Then his eyes found Raymond Clark. The hardness in the sergeant major's face melted away, replaced by a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He strode across the diner, his path straight and true, stopping about a foot in front of Raymond. He clicked his heels together. His right hand snapped up to his brow in a salute so sharp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. "Gunnery Sergeant Clark," Thorne's voice boomed, a parade ground command that filled every corner of the silent room. "On behalf of the Commandant and the entire United States Marine Corps, we apologize for the delay. We are here to provide your escort, sir." Raymond, startled, instinctively began to straighten his posture, the years of training kicking in. As Thorne held his salute, one of the young Marines from the formation stepped forward, stopped, and began to speak. His voice was clear and formal, reciting from a script seared into the heart of the Corps. "Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Ironheart Clark," the Marine announced, his voice ringing with pride. 22 years of active service, veteran of the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, recipient of the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars with Valor device for heroic achievement, recipient of 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. The diner was utterly still. You could have heard a napkin drop. Jessica's phone had lowered, the smug look on her face replaced by a mask of horrified understanding. Chad's face was ashen, his jaw slack. He looked from the saluting sergeant major to the old man he had called a costume wearer, and for the first time in his life, he seemed to understand the concept of a mistake from which there is no recovery. The young Marine continued, his voice unwavering. "Sir, your legendary actions on Hill 1282, where you held the line against overwhelming enemy forces for 72 consecutive hours after your officers were incapacitated, directly resulting in the survival of your entire platoon, are still required reading for all officer candidates at Quantico. It is an honor to be in your presence." Sergeant Major Thorne slowly, deliberately lowered his hand. He kept his eyes locked on Raymond, a silent communication passing between 2 generations of warrior. Then he turned his head just enough for his gaze to fall upon Chad, Kevin, and Jessica. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet fury was more terrifying than any shout. "You," he said, his voice a low growl that promised unimaginable consequences. "You stand in the presence of a living legend. A man who walked through fire and bled in the snow so that children like you could have the freedom to sit here in a warm diner and throw insults you are too ignorant to understand." He took a half step toward them. "The uniform you called a costume is a testament to a life of honor, courage, and commitment that you will never know. The medals you mocked were paid for in blood, sacrifice, and the kind of bravery you can't even comprehend." His glacial gaze then shifted to the manager, who seemed to be trying to shrink into the floor. "And you," Thorne said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You allowed this to happen in your establishment. You should be ashamed." Raymond, who had watched this all unfold with a weary sadness, finally spoke. He placed a frail, trembling hand on the sergeant major's powerful forearm. "Easy, Sergeant Major," he said, his voice soft. "They're just kids. They don't know any better." He turned his faded blue eyes to the 3 students, who were now huddled together like frightened sheep. He looked at them not with anger, but with a profound, aching pity. "Freedom isn't free," he told them. "Remember that. And respect costs nothing at all." As Raymond's hand rested on his own blazer, his fingers brushed against the cool metal of the Silver Star. The touch sparked another flicker of memory, a flash of the truth behind the honor. He saw it with perfect clarity. A frozen night in Korea, the world lit only by star sheen on the snow and the distant terrifying bloom of artillery. He saw himself, a young man pressing a bloody field dressing into the side of a wounded Marine, a boy from Ohio who couldn't have been more than 18. He was shielding the boy's body with his own as enemy machine gun fire tore through the air above them, whispering its deadly song. He could still hear his own young voice, hoarse and desperate. "Stay with me, son. Just stay with me." The medal wasn't for the fighting. It was for that moment. It was for Miller. "Let's go, Gunny," Sergeant Major Thorne said gently, his tone shifting from iron to velvet as he addressed Raymond. "We'll take you wherever you want to go." One of the young Marines stepped forward and respectfully pulled Raymond's chair out for him. Another walked to the table and placed a crisp $100 bill on top of Raymond's 5. "For his coffee," the Marine said to the stunned manager, "and for the inconvenience." They formed a protective honor guard around the old veteran, a phalanx of dress blues, and escorted him toward the door. As they passed, the patrons of the Oak Barrel Diner, as if moved by a single unspoken command, began to rise from their seats. A man in a business suit, a family with 2 small children, the couple who had turned away, they all stood. As Raymond Clark, the unassuming hero, walked out of the diner, a soft, then growing wave of applause filled the room. In the weeks that followed, Jessica's video never went viral the way she had hoped. Instead, a video taken by another patron of the 2 black SUVs, the 6 immaculate Marines, and the thunderous salute spread across the internet like wildfire. The university issued a formal apology, and the 3 students became local pariahs, their faces a meme for entitled ignorance. The Oak Barrel Diner underwent a change, too. A few days after the incident, a new professionally printed sign appeared in the window. "All veterans and active duty military receive a 25% discount. Thank you for your service." About a month later, Raymond was in the canned goods aisle of the local grocery store, trying to decide between creamed corn and whole kernel. He heard a hesitant voice behind him. "Mr. Clark, sir?" He turned to see Chad, the ringleader. The boy was wearing a grocery store apron and a name tag. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out shame. "Sir," Chad stammered, unable to meet Raymond's eyes. "I just wanted to apologize for that day. I was an ignorant fool. What I did was, there's no excuse. I'm sorry." Raymond Clark looked at the young man for a long moment, studying the genuine remorse in his face. He saw not the arrogant tormentor from the diner, but a boy who had been forced to learn a hard lesson. He gave a single slow nod of his head. "I know," he said, his voice soft. Then he turned back to the shelves, picked up the can of creamed corn and placed it in his cart. Raymond Clark's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest, most unassuming forms. If you were moved by this story of valor and vindication, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories for more.